Here's how to shoot a bow and arrow. Shooting a bow is a really great hobby, but it requires a lot of practice to master. Now real quick, raise your hand if you've ever shot a bow or have any experience with archery. Now because this is a video, I have no idea if you're raising your hand. I'm gonna just assume like 2 people raise their hands. In that case, this is a good video for you. If you want to get into archery and learn how to shoot a bow, first it's important to know what bow you're using. For example, this is a recurve bow. This is a recurve bow. As you can tell, it's a very basic design, which is essentially a stick along with the string they use to pull back and release the arrow once it's ready to shoot. And this is a compound bow. Although it's a small version, it does resemble the basics of what makes a compound bow, which are these pulleys right here, that instead of just pulling the entire body back at once, the pulleys help make it easier to pull back all the way so you can hold it for a long period of time. And although it is a small version of a compound bow, it's not the size of the bow that matters, but how you use it. Before you actually begin shooting, it's important to have some equipment that might be needed throughout. Some examples of these could be this glove, so I'm able to pull back the string farther without it causing any damage or pain to my fingers. This arm guard, so whenever I pull back the bowstring and let go, just in case my arm's not in the right place and I accidentally hit myself with the string, it won't hurt because I'm protected. And also a quiver. This isn't necessary, but it is a good place to store your arrows for while you're shooting or when you're done. Now that you have your bow type ready and also your equipment as well, now it's time to actually learn how to start shooting a bow. First, I'm going to start with the recurve bow. The recurve bow, as you can see, there's no actual sight along the bow. It's simply a stick, the arrow, and the bowstring. And although this bow does have little holes that you could attach a sight on if you want to, 9 times out of 10, there's not going to be a sight on the bow. So you might be asking, well, how do I shoot with the bow? For this one, use something what's called instinctive shooting. And for that, you aim using the tip of the arrowhead. And what I mean by that is when you're pulling down the back of the string, use the little tip of the arrow to aim in reference to where your target is and about how far it is. Now this is a hard skill to master because without a sight, there's no certain distance that you know it will hit. So this just takes lots of practice because for one, every time you pull back the bowstring, it's not the same distance. Because on one pull, I could have it like this. On the next pull, I could have it farther like that. So because of that, the distance that the arrow is compared to the target is not always the same. So it takes a good training with the bow to just get the same distance right. And also time to master how far that tip of the arrowhead needs to be in comparison to the target. So depending on the distance, you might aim a little high, a little low, or simply on how you're holding the bow and the wind, you might aim a little bit to the left or a little to the right to hit your target. But after some practice and a lot of practice, you'll be able to hit your target. Now it's time to learn how to shoot a compound bow. One thing about the compound bow is, well, 2 things actually. Okay, look at this. One, it does have a sight, and this one only has 1 peg, but it still has a set amount of distance. Of course, there are a lot better compound bows with better sights that have different colored pins to mark different distances. And many times this is used by hunters because they want to be more accurate so they can actually eat dinner. So that's one reason why this is a lot easier to use. Another reason is on this one, once I pull it back all the way, if I can get the arrow on here. For this one, when I pull it all the way, the bowstring locks into place. So this makes it easier to aim because there's a lot less strain on my arm or on my back as I'm pulling this back. So I have a lot easier time to aim. And yes, this is a adult arrow on a kid's bow, but I don't want to spend the next hour looking for my old arrows, so I'm just going to use it. And of course you shouldn't do this, but who's going to stop me? So you just pull it back, it locks into place, and you shoot. Now that you know how to shoot these bows, or at least somewhat shoot these bows, I want to talk about a little bit about the history behind these. Now for starters, I'm going to start off with the recurve bow and a couple of bows that are similar to this. For starters, the recurve bow, or I guess just the simple form bow like this, is the oldest type of bow that there is. The reason it is so old is because of how basic it is. All you need is really a flexible stick, some sort of string that you can use to pull back that flexible stick, and with that you can shoot a sharp stick at whatever target or meal you're trying to hunt. A few versions of this bow is the English longbow, which is similar to this, but instead of having these curves, it is simply just a lot longer. And because it is so long, they're able to pull it back probably about like that much or so, and it has a lot of potential energy, more than necessary to shoot at a very long distance. Another version of this bow is the Mongolian horseback bow. And as some of you might know, Mongolians were known to be horseback warriors, which means they fought while riding a horse. And it's a little hard to shoot a bow on top of a horse when the bow is 10 feet or longer. So to compensate for this, they drastically shortened the bow. But because they shortened the length of the bow arm, it lost some of that potential energy that it had. To make up for this, these curves were added. Although for a Mongolian bow, the curves are more curved. And the reason they added these curves was so it doesn't have to go just this much. The curves actually catch onto the string and is able to go back a lot farther. And the next version is sort of a mix of both of these, which is the recurve bow, which is what we have basically today. And this is a mix because it's not as short as a Mongolian bow, but it still sort of has that curve, just not as definite of a curve. This is my favorite bow because of how simple it is. The fact that it is simply a stick that is bent to have more leverage, and also a string. Another reason I really like it is because it doesn't have a sight, or at least most of them don't have a sight. And whenever you're using that and it doesn't have a sight, I'll use the little arrow for the instinctive shooting. The reason I like that is because it's a lot more challenging to use it, and because it's more challenging, whenever you do get good with it, or whenever you do hit your target, it's a lot more rewarding. Now, next is the more recent version of the bow, the compound bow. And for this, we use today's era technology to improve the basic form. And with this, we added not only a sight, but also pulleys. And the pulleys just help it draw in more energy, and also it has the ability to lock into place at the same distance every time. And when it is locked in place, it is very easy to hold it and control it, so you can aim at a target a lot easier and then let go. One key thing I do want to throw in is to never dry fire a bow. And some of you may or may not know this, but whenever you use a bow, it has the stored up energy and it releases it into the arrow, and that's how the arrow is able to go so far and the bow stays intact. Whenever there isn't an arrow and you pull back the bow at full speed, that energy has nowhere to go but the bow itself. So it will often rattle the bow and either damage it or destroy it, leading to some part breaking or snapping, which will in return hurt you. So it's very dangerous to not only the bow but to yourself as well. And that is my presentation on how to use a bow, the different types of bows, any possible equipment, and a little history behind them. And hopefully each and every one of you left with some little piece of knowledge that you didn't have before. And before I leave, I want to show you a little hidden fact. If you grab any arrow and sort of balance it between your fingers, it is able to act almost like a compass and point north. And you might be asking, Adrian, how does it do that if it's just a simple arrow, which is just a stick? And the thing is, it doesn't do that, and I just made it up. Have a good day. Actual sight, because you don't have a certain distance narrowed down to a bow. So this takes a lot